Hi, this is Anthony, parent of Iris Medic, and well, we had some news yesterday that wasn't great. It seems like we go one step forward and maybe two steps back, something like that. Uh, that the FATCA lawsuit brought in Canada was not heard by the Supreme Court of Canada. And with us is Keith Redmond, global advocate for the American abroad, along with John Richardson, a Canadian attorney who is probably the foremost expert on FATCA in Canada. So if this is an issue that's affecting you, you came to the right place. We're going to start off. John, can you help us sort of retrace our history and how we got to this place that we are right now?
Yeah. So this is actually a lawsuit that has its origins in the early part of 2014 when the government of Canada signed a FATCA IGA with the United States. The effect of that was simply to legislate FATCA as Canadian law on Canadian soil. And by doing that, override all the normal privacy rights and non-discrimination rights that people normally would have available to them in Canada. And basically, as part of the legislation, force the banks, Canadian banks, and financial companies generally, to one, seek out anybody who might reasonably be accused of being a U.S. citizen. And two, once identified as such, forward their bank account information to the Canada Revenue Agency, which then would forward it on to the IRS. So a group of people came together in 2014 to basically create some opposition to this. The Alliance for the Defense of Canadian Sovereignty, it's a nonprofit corporation which was used to fund a lawsuit. The most consistent plaintiff over the 10 years was Gwen Deegan. But all the plaintiffs were basically Canadian citizen residents who happened to have been tainted by a U.S. place of birth and therefore were potentially somehow subject to a lifetime of U.S. citizenship-based taxation. A tremendous amount of money was raised, I think, by crowdfunding standards. I think I was not personally involved in the fundraising, but it was over $500,000, I believe, which was a tremendous amount to come from a small people. Lawyers were hired, and the lawsuit was rolled out. And over the 10-year period, it was heard in the Federal Court of Canada in 2014 on the issue of whether this violated the tax treaty. It was then heard in 2019 by the Federal Court of Canada on the issue of whether it violated sections 8 and 15 of the Charter. No success on any of those things. A year ago or so, that decision came down, and you have to get leave to appeal that to the Supreme Court of Canada, which denied leave to appeal actually last Thursday, July the 13th, putting this chapter, I emphasize this particular chapter, this particular initiative of opposition to FATCA and citizenship taxation in Canada to an end. However, I think that this has been an extremely important initiative, and like many things that where perhaps you don't get the immediate result that you want, the result of it certainly has been helpful in getting this issue on the table, etc. So I look forward to sort of filling in the blanks and discussing this with you, and I think discussing what I think it really means going forward. And I think the biggest losers here are not Americans abroad, but I think the biggest losers are residents inside the United States, because what this does is serves notice that the effect of these FATCA IGAs, and I would add the savings clause, is to signal that other countries, other sovereign countries, will cooperate with the United States in what really is, and there's no other way to put this, something that puts extreme barriers to being able to leave the United States and live a normal life in another country.
Thank you, John, for that. And it's just, it's sad news. And I think one of my points is this, and that the notice to Americans in the U.S. are hurt by this. But as I'm looking at this decision and what we're finding and what we see with Belgium, and really one of the greatest points you made through the years of doing this, is that the idea of a U.S. person, the person subject to U.S. taxation, is something that is not a U.S. law. It is strictly by U.S. regulation. And so simply by regulations, the U.S. can change the definition of who a U.S. taxpayer is. And very simply by regulation. So the U.S. can change the definition of taxpayer to anyone in the world.
That is exactly right, Anthony. And let's just pause and focus on that for 1 second, because this is a point that I swear to God, none of the lawyers involved in this and any of these lawsuits or initiatives anywhere in the world seems to grasp. Number one.
Yeah.
Number two, the governments who signed these FATCA IGAs clearly do not grasp this, right? And, we've talked about this previously, right? That, the effect of these FATCA IGAs is to allow the United States, under the plain terms of the IGA, to define anybody they want as a U.S. citizen and therefore be claimed as a U.S. taxpayer in that country. And this is not exaggeration. This is not fanciful. This is found, for listeners, in the definition sections of the FATCA IGA, specifically section EE. Have a look at it, where it says that the definition of U.S. person is defined under the Internal Revenue Code, which is a kind way of saying it's defined under U.S. law.
So the U.S. and again, this is not a law that's going to be voted on. Who's subjected to this isn't who's subject to FATCA around the world is not an answer. It's not a question answered by the legislative process. It's out of the picture. This is strictly if some bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. decide that every person in the world is an American person. Now Canada says, yes, you're right. So we should start sharing our information with the United States. And to me, that's the really the big outrage for me, is that Canadians have no clue that they just lost everything to the U.S. That, okay, you're just thinking that this applies to Americans. Oh, poor Americans, they're going to have their data shared with the IRS. Like, my friend, you couldn't be more wrong. First of all, number one, that law, it's not even a law, that's subject to change at a whim. And number two, what's the FATCA mechanism? The fact is, someone has to go through and determine whether or not you're a U.S. person or not. And the fact is, your information could be shared by mistake is rather significant. And as we saw, we had at least a little brief help from Belgium. We had a ruling. FATCA violates the GDPR because of the privacy concerns. And now Canada's falling over itself. And that's really the thing. It's like Canada is falling over itself to surrender. They want to be the first ones in line to surrender everything to the U.S. via FATCA.
Yeah.
Chad, I want to talk about some of the stories out there that are a little bit, I think, missed the mark. Because you sent me some links to here, like this right here, this article right here in Canadian broadcast, CBC. Okay. And this is really what they get it down to is they're saying that this refusing to share information with the IRS would have serious effects on Canada's financial sector, government says. Well, the government says it.
Well, can we just pause on that point for a minute?
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I want to correlate some of these comments to the progress of the lawsuit. So basically what happened in the lawsuit was, now let me just say this to broaden this more generally. There have over the years, this was one of the early ones, In fact, I think it was the earliest, it was the first one by far from outside the United States, although Republicans overseas, and launched the FATCA legal action lawsuit that failed for lack of standing in the United States in 2014. But what's interesting is that when you look at, how do you attack these kinds of laws, there are different mechanisms available in different countries. I mean, if you're attacking the government who signed the IGA, you have to do it under the law of that country. Now, in Canada, the theory was that it violated provisions of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now, Canada does not have a tradition of privacy rights like the United States. No, it's true. Okay, it does not.
Well, I mean, we have a stated. My reaction was because
true.
The difference between what the myth is and what reality is.
Exactly.
That's my reaction. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. Canada does not have a lot of built-in legal protections. Okay. For that, and certainly the United States doesn't. But with this European stuff, right? They have the benefit of the GDPR, right? So we have Jenny's thing in the UK, and various things run by the Accidental American groups. And they have had a different mechanism, if you will, to attack this, which, we would not have had. Now, I'm not saying that the breach of privacy rights would have been irrelevant in Canada. It would have had some bearing, I think, on whether the search, for the data was reasonable or not. But the point I want to make here, for just sort of everyday people trying to understand this to the extent that they want to, is that these various anti-FATCA initiatives in different countries, they're necessarily going to be different and have different architecture, based on what is available under the laws. Now, in Canada, there was no GDPR equivalent, so this was based on a violation of the Charter of Rights. Now, very 50,000, point of view, right? So let's say, you're arguing that, this violates, it's an unreasonable search under Section 8 of the Charter. Well, there's a Section 1 that allows the government to override a charter right if it can be demonstrably proved that it's necessary in a free and democratic society, et cetera. Now, what was fascinating here, and frankly embarrassing, as a Canadian, I really must say that, I think that it's, I feel embarrassed to be a Canadian citizen, honestly, when I look at their behavior, because what the government actually did was argue that even if this violated any charter rights, of course their claim was that it didn't, wouldn't make any difference because it was absolutely necessary to do this to a subset of its citizens, because if it didn't, it would be, the financial sector would be damaged by the United States. Like, I'm not kidding. The government lawyers, had all these expert witness things going on how Canada's economy would be destroyed. I mean, you'd think it was a joke, but it was totally, embarrassing.
Well,
right. In the context, of course, of Representative Higgins in New York claiming that Canada and the United States are these great friends, et cetera. And I think that, the truth is the opposite, but seriously, it was absolutely amazing. And in fact, in the government's response to the application for leave to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada, I mean, this is astounding. One of their arguments was they actually pointed, they're probably reading my blogs, they actually pointed to the saving clause, which said that Canada has already agreed to allow the United States to impose taxation on its residents or U.S. citizens. They actually put that in their brief. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I mean, it's true. But to actually go out and say, well, none of this matters because we've already agreed that the U.S. can impose taxation on any Canadian residents they want. That's in effect what they said.
So it's kind of like this. So Canada signed something, they have no idea really what's in there, or maybe they do. And then after they sign, it's like, well, nothing can be done about this thing. What can you do about it? We signed this thing. We signed this law with the United States, and it has disastrous consequences, but we got to go through with it. Otherwise, we're going to have problems. And we don't have any recourse whatsoever at all. I mean, all we are is a sovereign country, the largest trading partner with the United States of America. We have zero leverage at all to do anything about this. We're just going to accept the United States word on every single thing, and certain people of the United States would just accept their words on certain little things. Before we get going, I just want to check in. I think we got some comments going here. I see that we got some comments. So, this is sort of some of the comments that are sort of people are Suzanne's showing what our concern was here. She has a comment on Belgium. She claimed the mouse roared. I don't think that's the end of the story. And they showed cowardice, but now here it is that the excuse given is that FATCA fights tax evasion, which we've gone over a million times, how it really doesn't do anything for it. She was surprised by that. Of course, the large companies, they're not going to be impacted by it. It doesn't matter to them. FATCA doesn't really affect the larger companies. Here's her concern here. U.S. imposing FATCA online payment service requiring to report suspected U.S. persons. That is, if you're paying for something online, here's somebody. Why not? Why can't it just go to that if we're defining everything so crazy? And here's Suzanne's final comment this morning so far. I think she's got a point there. She half expects the definition of U.S. person for tax purpose to be changed to anyone that ever thought about the U.S. and then asking for proof that they never thought about it.
Well, actually, on that point, let me just say this, okay? That as you know, the way the U.S. tax system works is that everybody's presumed to be a U.S. person for tax purposes unless they can show they're a non-resident alien. I mean, if this whole FATCA IGA stuff really had any integrity, it should not be let's hunt for U.S. persons. Rather, it should be everybody in the world has to report and prove that they're a non-resident alien, right? I mean, that would be the approach that would actually be consistent with what the U.S. tax code says. But I want to get something else in here that I think is. I mean, we all know how horrible this is, okay? But the question is, I think, largely, why is it so difficult to get traction on this? And here's my theory on this, that I have not seen yet a single lawyer incorporate into the arguments on this, all right, what the real effect of this is on people's lives. The trauma, the financial destruction, the inability, to plan for retirement, right? This is not, first of all, we know it's not information sharing anyway, okay? But it goes way beyond the transmission of information, because what this does, it actually assists the United States in expanding the practical effect of its tax base into other countries, because I don't care what the lawyers say or what the theoreticians say on this. I know for a fact, because these are the people who I, work with, that what happens is that it incentivizes them to enter the U.S. tax system if they haven't. And then all kinds of people enter the U.S. tax system, for example, and then got hit with that transition tax thing and other things. So there's absolutely no question that the United States is using citizenship taxation as a tool to siphon revenue and capital out of other countries. In fact, I was thinking about this yesterday, and rather than calling it citizenship taxation, I think a better word for it might be Amera theft. Amera theft.
Yeah.
A process where the United States essentially so the United States says, oh my God, look, there's somebody in another country. There's a business that might be profitable. How are we?
And they, and what's nice about America is they can count on their partner countries to surrender their own people to them.
Well, they already have. I mean,
right. They're around. I mean, Canada's doing the dirty work, right? Of rounding up okay, here's who we want. Is this good enough? And maybe the United States said, yeah, but actually we need another sacrifice. Can you guys do another sacrifice? Because we're going to just need a little bit more. Now, I want to move over to Keith, because as you sort of started talking about the human impact, Keith is certainly well versed in the human impact of this. And this is sort of what's obnoxious. You read an article like this, by CBC Canada. And, it's like the headline is refusing to share info would have serious effects on Canada's financial sector, the government says. Okay,
Yeah.
well, are there any other interests in this at all? Other than, Keith, is there anyone in this story other than the government? Could you think of any other people that are impacted by FATCA other than the government in the financial sector?
Well, sure. The individual person who has been identified as a U.S. person, whether that be an American living in Canada, who's a dual national, or an American living in Canada, permanently.
Yeah.
What we deem accidental American, and I guess with Canada, it's more border babies. And not just those individuals, but their spouses, their partners, and their families. It affects savings moving forward. It affects on how they are going to navigate to incongruent tax systems. There's a lot to unpack there, but no, it ain't the government that is
right.
It really affects. It affects the individual in a ruinous fashion, and I'm not being histrionic. I deal with this all the time.
Yeah, it is an utterly ruinous fashion. And CBC can't even, stomach to itself to sort of look more than just to say, oh, this is a lawsuit filed by two women impacted by this law. That's all they can say.
Well, it's worse than that, Anthony, because what you'll find is that the way this is described, these people are, the victims of this are never described as Canadian residents, your neighbor. They're always described U.S. citizens, maybe a tenuous tie to Canada at best, or, dual citizens, that's suspicious as, courtesy of Ron Wyden, right? I mean, we know that dual citizenship is suspicious.
Exactly.
They do not understand that the people who this affects, it's not some expat American who comes for a few years to Canada, if there is such a thing, really. Who's in the U.S. tax system. This affects the guy living in rural Saskatchewan who, was born in Canada but has an American parent. The type of guy is a model of the community, wakes up at 3 a.m. on Saturdays to take your kid to hockey practice, and all of a sudden, find they're disabled. They don't have the normal retirement planning options that their neighbors do. These are the people who are impacted by this. And now how are they impacted, right? To be clear on this, and this never shows up in the commentary and the comments on these articles. If they're subject to the U.S. tax system, they are effectively disabled from a large number. In fact, I think 90% of what financial planning in Canada is all about. For example, Canadian-controlled private corporations operate as private pension plans. They can't have those because of the GILTI rules, and et cetera. The sale of the principal residence, tax-free thing, is part of they don't have the benefit of that. They, normal people, small people invest in mutual funds. They can't do that, because of the PFIC rules. Their TFSA income is taxed. So, I mean, this is what it really means, right?
But I think we might be making we keep on going to the accidental America, the dual American in Canada. And I think that might be, that could be a bit of the problem of not explaining the problem correctly, because we're saying only affects a few subsets of people in Canada. When I'm looking at this, I'm like, no, this is every Canadian is now subject to U.S. taxation and the enforcement of FATCA. Simply, and I'm saying subject to because that is simply being able to change by a regulation. By a regulation Treasury wants to throw out there. Now the Supreme Court of Canada has laid the groundwork to make Canada, every Canadian, subject to the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. Because here's the reasoning for it. Well, we can't be sure the banks are actually doing their due diligence. So why don't you just send us everybody? Then we'll sort out, who you didn't do. And that's really the issue. If I was a Canadian, not even a U.S. person, I would be incredibly alarmed by this, because it seems to be setting the stage for something. This really seems to be setting the stage for something, because this makes no sense whatsoever why Canada is bending over backwards to impose this will of the IRS. It's
Well, the
just
reason they're bending over backwards, Anthony, is because of the financial sector. Okay, you have to understand that, and this is worldwide, right? You know, the financial institutions worldwide badly want to uphold, and to be very clear, I'm going to repeat that, badly want to uphold the FATCA IGAs, because the reason for this is that what the IGAs do is get the country itself, Canada, Belgium, what have you, to legislate FATCA as Canadian or Belgium law, all right, and force the banks, right, to comply with this, so that the banks are not caught in this position where, you know, if they don't comply with FATCA, they've got a problem with the United States. If they do comply, you know, they've got a problem with Canada or Belgium. So really, you know, what this is about is, you know, the banks matter in Canada. I mean, in 2014, I was part of a discussion. I guess technically I was testifying from a parliamentary committee on this, although it was more of a discussion, I would say. But you know, that was the complete context of it, right? I mean, there were a number of bank type people that were saying, "Oh no, you know, this won't affect many people," blah blah blah, you know, etc. And you know, my advice for people going forward, I mean, if anybody, you know, advice a little bit strong, but what I have learned by watching this over 10 years, you know, which you can, and being a part of it, whether you can accept it or reject it is up to you, is that until the narrative is properly framed here of how this destroys the lives of individuals, this is never going to be reversed. Okay. You know, this is what is essential. And, you know, it's absolutely amazing, because if you were to read the, you know, what I'll call the pleadings is a technical term for the briefs, you know, the documents filed in court back and forth. For the whole 10 years, there was never any discussion. I can't think of a single instance where there was any discussion of how this affected the lives of ordinary Canadians. It was all, you know, in the context of this theoretical information
right.
thing. Oh, look, the world is moving in the direction of FATCA and CRS. And of course, you know, these people don't understand it well enough to even understand that FATCA and CRS have nothing to do with each other.
They're not the same thing. No, they're not. No, they're not.
You know, I mean, they're
No.
completely different things. But the bottom line is this, that until the narrative is properly framed here, okay, then I don't think that there can be any significant gains. Now, in order to do that, though, what is necessary is for all of these individual affected, these groups, they have to come together and demand the end of citizenship taxation. Because right now, you know, we've got various people claiming this, claiming that. You know, some just want to improve citizenship taxation. Oh, you know, let's get a carve out for this or that. Some, you know, we just don't want, our group just doesn't want to be subject to FATCA at all, because, you know, we don't have any connection to the United States. Until the world comes together and simply says this, you know, yeah, you know, we agree with the point that every sovereign country has the right to define who its tax residents are, and that, of course, includes the United States. But you know what? Here's where we draw the line. In fact, leave that one up, Anthony. In fact, here's where we draw the line. Yeah, the United States can define who its tax residents are, but you know what? The United States cannot reach into other countries and define our tax residents as their tax residents. That's the key point here, and that's the issue.
That is beautifully said.
Now, this comment, which I put up as a tweet, you know, there was a, you know, Canadian press wrote a, you know, yeah, the word's right there, a lame article, as I say, okay, you know, about this, which really just described it as, you know, some sort of information exchange thing, which of course it is. And the Supreme Court said that it wouldn't hear it. So I threw this comment up. This is the Globe and Mail. And I thought this was actually, it was my attempt to frame the issue for what it really is. So a lame article indeed that fails to explain the real I would agree with that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. Yeah.
A constitutional challenge to Canada's decision parentheses, with a gun to its head, to enact a U.S. law, FATCA IGA, on Canadian soil. That seems right.
Yep, I'm with
Included
you.
in the FATCA IGA, which Canada signs, provision that allows the United States, under the rules in the U.S. Internal Revenue Code, which can be changed, designate any resident of Canada as a U.S. citizen for the purpose of taxation, reporting, and penalties. Then I make the point again. It's hard to do this, in this context, but I'm very proud of this one, actually. This includes people born in Canada to a U.S. citizen who has never lived in the United States. Hopefully that might get attention.
Yeah.
The broader context is the U.S. claiming residents of Canada as residents of the USA for tax purposes. Now, here we go. What does that mean? The result of being claimed by the U.S. as tax residents that you lose, among other things, then I go over in Canada, tax-free capital gain on sale of principal residence, the ability to use the TFSA, obtaining control of private corporations, normal Canadian mutual. Little surprised that the commenters here seem to think that's okay. And my parting shot, wait till the IRS decides that you qualify to be a U.S. citizen.
There you go. Yeah, sorry, I'm just taking care of my battery here, just making sure I don't die. I have a little, exactly the point. Anybody can be a U.S. person pretty easily. And I would just say, John, you said this subject to the change in the tax code. That's not really true. Because no, you're right. But you could change it with the regulations. You don't.
Well, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. There's so much of the tax code allows the Treasury to designate things by regulation.
To come in and say, okay, this is who we're going to go after and why.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
what?
As I've said before, Anthony,
we're going to
just
have
this on previous podcasts. Combination
I'm
of signing back
running out of battery pretty quickly here.
The combination of signing the FATCA IGA plus the savings clause, these countries have completely surrendered their sovereignty to the United States. And they're proud of it.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. It really is.
Everything. No, there's no discussion. It's sort of a it's a situation that just sort of is bear with me one moment. Gentlemen, continue while I address my battery issue.
Yeah. Well, do you think, John, that if these countries had a better, fuller understanding of how the U.S. taxes, that maybe they wouldn't be so apt to throw their own citizens under the bus?
I think it would be a help, but you got to remember here that this is really about protecting the financial sector, right?
Yeah.
I think it would help. It would help frame the discussion, right? So at least they'd have to say, well, you know what? We've decided that our banks are far more important than you as an individual, so we don't care about you. And we don't care if you're, a citizen of Belgium or not, all right? And this is why, to come back to what we've talked about previously, the only solution to this, assuming the continued existence
of
citizenship taxation, the only possible solution here is to ensure that there are no U.S. accounts in the country. They've got to completely ban U.S. citizens from having bank accounts. That's certainly what I would do.
Yeah.
And sort of stop the pussyfooting around on this. It's as though, these U.S. citizens, they go to other countries, they effectively become the modern day equivalent of Trojan horse soldiers, just kind of used to siphon income and assets out of those other countries.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, and that part gets missed. And that part.
So what do we have?
Sorry,
what do we have for?
Go ahead.
Anthony, you've got no volume.
Yeah, I thought it was me. Well, what I'll say is, I think that part is missed on these American overseas organizations, on the damage that's being done in the resident countries. It's never talked about, the damage done.
They don't care.
None of them.
What do we have?
None of them.
Yeah, they don't care about that at all.
Yeah.
So what do we have for our next steps here? Anything gonna happen?
Well, I don't know. I don't think it's so much a question of next steps as it is a question of continued steps.
Oh, I got no volume. I think we're having problems here. We are
No, we hear you okay, Anthony.
pushing it to the limit here.
I could hear you, Anthony.
Apologies to our viewers. It's just a technical hiccup that happens.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so look, I think that there are some lessons here, okay, and maybe we can do part 2 of this. We get the the technical problem sorted out, all right. But for now, here's
Yeah.
how I see this, okay. First of all, I just want to.
Oh, okay. I'm coming back now. All right. It's
I want to say
crazy,
and
crazy.
acknowledge how much
morning.
work was done by the group of people.
You know what? I think we might want to end it here. It seems like we're having some technical difficulties here.
Yeah, I don't think Anthony can hear us, John.
We're going to continue. We're going to continue the fight. And just something I want to bring up that a lot of people we're looking for a global change. Yeah, technical difficulty. Am I still out of here, guys? Can you hear me?
I hear you fine.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Keith?
I can.
Okay, before we sign off, all right, maybe just make a few points here, and then I think we should pick this up with another one. But the first point I want to make is that I would like to encourage listeners and people affected by this to acknowledge the tremendous amount of work that was done by the people who put this thing together. Particularly the other 3 members of the Alliance for the Defense of Canadian Sovereignty. I'm the co-chair. Stephen Kish was the chair. Carol Tapanel and Patricia Moon. Very important. A lot of work over a long period of time, and they deserve a tremendous shout out. Secondly, the plaintiffs. This is tremendously courageous. Takes a lot of courage, to become the public face of a lawsuit like this. And, really, I think everybody should pause and say,
all right,
thank you so much.
think we are doing too
for
well
your
with
willingness.
We've had severe technical issues.
Yeah, I don't think Anthony can hear us, John.
We're going to have to end
We're
it
gonna have to
here,
do
I
part
think.
2.
I
Let
want
me
to thank
just
everyone.
finish the 3 or 4
joining-
points, then we'll
I don't think he can hear you, John.
We are
He
going to
cannot hear you.
continue this discussion. All right, fantastic. Yeah, we're just having a little bit of. I can hear you. We're just a real laggy here. We just got real laggy. The internet I think the internet is overwhelmed this morning. That's where we're at. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So thanking those people. Secondly,
Yep.
I made the point that I do not see this as a loss, interestingly. Perhaps I'm out of my mind. But I see this as just one sort of step along the journey, which will inevitably bring an end to this stuff. And, so the Supreme Court didn't give leave to appeal this thing. Well, that doesn't change the fact that this took place over 10 years. It doesn't change the fact that the challenge took place. And sooner or later, all of these things start adding together to make a difference. So, this is not a loss, okay? This is just a circumstance along a longer road, and it's played a very, very valuable role in that. Third thing I don't want to repeat is it's extremely important for this to stop being defined as an information exchange issue or primarily as a banking access issue, although it includes those things. What it is the United States coming to other countries and claiming their tax residents as U.S. tax residents, disabling these people from
Oh, I can hear
financial
you. I got you. No, I agree. Absolutely.
and using them as a tool, a mechanism to siphon capital out of
I
that
can hear
country
you.
and into the United States. So anyway, I think that's where we are with it. Thanks, Anthony, for the discussion here, et cetera. Perhaps we can pick it up. But now for people where they are,
All
I
right,
think that
we'll have to
what
continue
does
this
signal-
discussion.
is that people are going to have to move
Yeah.
more in the direction of renunciation, all right, than I think in the past. But in any case, we can pick this discussion up. Can't hear you, Anthony. That's me.